Welcome to another edition of Futurartist Records Presents. My guest today is a musician, a philosopher, a comedian, and a poet. And he's here today to talk about his best-selling book, Letting Go is All We Have to Hold On To. Futurartist Records presents Gregg Eisenberg. Thanks for coming up, Gregg. Appreciate it.
Great to be here.
I know it was a bit of a drive for you, and so hopefully everything was nice and easy on the way up.
Oh, you guys are great hosts.
Cool.
I really appreciate it.
Awesome.
Yeah,
Cool.
No problem.
Now, before we dive into the book a little bit, I wanted to mention so that the folks watching know, this is a number 3 bestseller on Amazon in the humor, puns, and wordplay category, and in the top 5 at the Boulder Bookstore. So congratulations on that.
Thank you very much.
That's fantastic. I have to admit, I have not been able to get through the whole thing yet. I'm reading, the introduction even is incredible. It's informative, it's funny, it's great. So
Thank you.
yeah, good stuff, and I can't wait to see how it ends up.
Sure.
Talking before the show, you do a lot of things. And we're dialing in today on one of the things that you do. You're a musician, you're a philosopher, you're a comedian, you're a poet. You do all these other things. But can you give us a real brief description of what is this book about?
This is a collection of jokes, and they are one-sentence jokes. They're all what we call aphorisms.
Okay.
Each one is one sentence long, and they are really, on the surface, just meant to be funny and make you laugh. But once you dig into the material, there's a lot more there.
Gotcha. And they're great, too. The stuff that I've read has been fantastic.
Oh, thanks.
So, yeah. Who is your audience typically? Because you also do performance with some of this stuff. And of the 800 jokes in the book, do you find that either for your audience or yourself, you end up having favorites that always kind of stand out?
Yeah, great question. I think the audience can be a wide range of people in this world. I have the people who help publicists that ask you who your audience is have addressed that question to me many times.
Yeah.
And I find that all walks of life can appreciate this material because a lot of it is just broadly about the human condition. So it's pretty relatable. Some of it is a little bit conceptual and challenges the reader a little bit, but I've noticed that people like to learn. And so I hope that my material pulls people along.
Yeah, especially if it's a joke, because they want to get the joke.
Right.
So then they have to learn what some of it means or what some of the words are, which is fantastic, because now they're learning and they're getting the joke both.
I don't think it's for a narrow audience.
Cool.
I've seen children enjoy it as young as 10 years old, and one of my biggest fans is a 91-year-old woman that actually lives here in Boulder.
I've noticed, too, you're talking about them being aphorisms and making you think and whatnot. And I've noticed that many, if not most of them, have two sides, two perspectives at the same time. Did you do that intentionally?
Yeah, a lot of these jokes just came to me hanging out with my friends in the hot tub over the last 10 years.
Nice.
We started joking around. We just stumbled on these formulas for humor that seemed to work. One of the main formulas that I like to play with is the principle of dualism or paradox. And it's not an original form of humor.
Sure.
It's the joke is that there's two ideas that don't really go together that are somehow in a clever way put together in one sentence.
Yes.
So, but there's other formulas that I use besides the formula of dualism or opposition. There's also the principle of threes, irony, ironic juxtaposition, puns.
Yeah.
And the idea of my book is to take you on a kind of ride where some of them are jokes that just make you laugh and are just what they seem to be on the surface.
Right.
Others, then every night I hit you with one that's a little more conceptual and you have to think about it and use your brain. And I think that's what is good about this material, is that it does make you think.
Yeah. It's not just a peruse through and be done. Every once in a while you stop and go, oh, interesting. That makes interesting reading that way.
Yeah.
So, and it makes it more entertaining.
And to answer your question about what are my favorite ones? I love them all. And in writing this book, I did what Michelangelo said you do when you sculpt.
Okay.
He said you keep removing marble and you keep removing it until there's nothing left to take away.
Yes.
I had a very large body of material, and I did the same thing. I kept on removing mediocre material and removing mediocre material, and all that was left was my favorite material.
Oh, that's cool. Okay.
So, but I can tell you that some of the favorite jokes in the book are like, I hate being self-employed. The staff is lazy and the management sucks.
Right.
Yeah. Another one that people like is, I would give you my undivided attention, but I feel like it would be rude to the person I'm texting with.
Right.
Aristotle said, we are what we repeatedly do. A thought I often ponder on my way to the bathroom. Right. What was another one? I started partying on Wednesday this week just to take a little pressure off the weekend.
Right.
Yeah. So they're all over the place.
Yeah. Yeah. But it's cool and it's applicable to everyday life, which is fantastic, because then you can look at the day you just got done with and, oh, that's not so bad.
Well, it's the kind of book also you can open to any page.
Yes.
And just read 2 or 3 of them, get a couple laughs, get your wheels turning, and then not look at it again for another week or two, because it isn't, you don't have to read it from beginning to end.
Right. Right.
So,
yeah, which is, and I'm going to grill you about that a little bit later on here. So,
right.
But yeah, no, that's true. And I was going to ask you, was that intentional as well, the format that you use? It's really cool. We talked prior to the show, too, about how it's formatted, the way you've got them separated and stuff. It reminds me a lot of the prints of the quips that were used by the Founding Fathers, where they would do something and then they would have a little design and then they would have another one. But it brings attention to each one of them without them getting confused with one another.
Mm-hmm.
So was that on purpose, or did it just look cool to you?
There are 16 chapters.
Mm-hmm.
It'd be fun to tell some of the chapter titles because some of them are funny.
Sure.
Oh, chapter 1 is called Take My Advice and Think for Yourself.
Right.
What is chapter 2? Real Space Has Curves. Chapter 3 is Even the Earth is Bipolar.
Right.
And chapter 4, I think, is I'm Going Aggressively New Age. So they're all, but the material is not meant to be dogmatic.
Right.
Right? I'm not driving towards some dogmatic point. I'm just trying to open up questions about how we use language to describe the human condition.
Right, right.
And so my material does force you to really look at what are the meanings of words and how can sentence construction be used to flip things on its side in a way that you don't even expect.
Right. A lot of them, you don't realize how much they click until you get, you read it and you're like, never even thought of that before. And it clicks, and suddenly you can think of examples that it applies to, which is, that I think that's what makes it cool too, because each person's going to see it differently. You refer to these jokes as the Eisenberg principles.
Yes.
Where did that come from, and what do you mean by that?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, it's referring to the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, which is a famous concept from quantum physics.
Okay.
Werner Heisenberg in I think in 1921 or in the early 1900s developed the uncertainty principle, which is probably one of the most well-known concepts from that period of physics, which basically states that you can't really know the exact location of a particle and its velocity. You can know one or the other.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
And I'm just playing on that because my name is Eisenberg and his name was Heisenberg. Sure. And these are funny little principles. So, and some of them are about physics and math as well.
I was going to mention that too, which is cool.
And you know, and the physicists were realizing that there's a basic dualism to the subatomic world. That subatomic particles can act like waves or particles depending on how you look at them. And I am trying to mimic that kind of principle with my jokes, which is there's multiple ways of seeing things depending, and you can turn perspectives on their side with just a turn of a phrase.
Right, right. It's awesome. It's funny. It's interesting. It's challenging, because you also call this Buddhist humor. So why is that?
Well, I think of this as Buddhist humor because Buddhist philosophy is preoccupied with what is the self, what is the mind, what is the nature of thoughts, and I think that my material is also preoccupied with the same thing. So there's a lot of jokes about thinking itself and referencing, am I my thoughts? One of the jokes in the book is, are my thoughts thinking me or am I thinking them?
Right.
In either case, my wife calls the shots.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
And so it's about thinking, so some of it's pretty reflective.
Right.
But again, not dogmatic.
Right.
I'm not telling you answers. I'm exposing that there's questions that we collectively still need to address about how we describe the human experience.
Right. So you described this book as a carefully curated collection of contradictions, all original. And we've talked about this a little bit already, but is there a message to the collection, or is each one have a specific message to it?
You know, I think each joke has its own nuance, and I think that the book has a rhythm to it, which I tried to create.
Sure.
Which is, there's some jokes that are just flat out just meant to make you laugh. Like the joke about I would give you my undivided attention, but I feel like it would be rude to the person I'm texting with. Is there a message to that? Maybe there is, but really I just want to get a laugh. I'm trying to loosen up your brain because then I'm going to hit you with a more philosophical one.
Right.
And maybe your mind is more receptive to some of my more nuanced and subtle ideas if I've already made you laugh with some other easier material.
Right.
Overall, I think the message of the whole collection is a lot of what we think we already know about reality gets in our way from learning more.
Yeah.
And so I'm asking the reader to suspend what you think you know about language, about meaning, and about how you construct your ideas about reality for a moment and recognize that we're still chipping away at what this human experience is. And you can take almost any concept and turn it on its side, make a joke about it, and dilute its meaning.
Right.
So the point is that there is no point. The point is we are still collectively discovering who we are and what our role is on this planet. And it's great that we're at this point. We're aware of ourselves as a species. We now know through science our role and our place in the universe. And let the questioning, the inquiry, and introspection continue.
Yeah.
It's a forward-looking book in a way. I'm not saying
is.
Let's look back at what we used to think. I'm really saying let's look forward and discover who we are in terms that we haven't even discovered yet.
Right. And talking even more about that, you know, it's not just about jokes. It's about introspection. You have scientific terminology, philosophical terminology. You know, some just street humor. But you don't push a certain perspective. Did you find that difficult as you were going through, or did you find it was pretty easy to not really state an opinion when you were writing these jokes?
I find it refreshing myself. I have read my fair share of philosophy and different writers talking about the human experience, and I guess I'm not a very dogmatic person. I myself question what I think in a way that the book kind of invites the reader to do as well, and which I think is refreshing because I'm not jamming some idea down the reader's throat. I want them to be involved in an inquiry with all of these important words that we use to describe our experience.
Yeah.
So some people will just laugh and not think that much about it, and that's great. I don't see how you can get through this whole book, though, without having some of your beliefs brought to question.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's the brilliance of it as well, is that anybody who reads it is going to think about and challenge themselves from where they stand, not from where you stand, not from what a general opinion is.
Right.
Because of the way it's stated, it makes them look at themselves and think about themselves in relation to all this other stuff, which is fantastic, because then they can go, either, yes, I stand where I stand, or I never thought about that. Maybe I should contemplate the other side.
I hope that the latter is what happens for
Right,
people.
right.
And I kind of think of this material as like aerating soil. It's like spring
Right.
is here. We're going to break all of this up. The worms, everything's, the
Yeah.
bugs, the air is all going to flow. Water's going to move through it. Amoeba are going to grow,
Yeah.
microorganisms, and new ideas can emerge.
Right,
So
right.
this is like compost for the brain. It's fertilizer, I hope.
It depends on how you categorize fertilizer.
I mean, fertilizer for the brain should get some new things growing.
Sure, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Talking about the challenges and making people think and making new ideas come up and stuff, you have seen some really positive things happen out of this book. And not just laughter, but you've seen it particularly with elderly. Can you talk a little bit about the impact that you've seen with the elderly who've read this and have gotten involved with it?
Yeah, I would love to. A pastor in Georgia found my book on Amazon after she was given a challenge by the elderly people that she ministers to.
Okay.
They said, can't you find something that is witty, concise, philosophical, and but funny to share with us at the end of services every week? And she looked and looked and looked for hours until she came upon my book and thought that was the perfect fit.
Cool.
So she's been presenting this material to them, and I've now spoken with her, and she contacted me through Amazon, which was really wonderful and gratifying, and she's put me in touch with the administrators of this senior living center. They have 70 centers around the country, and they see this material as very good for that community.
Yeah.
My jokes are short, which is good for people's attention spans, especially at that age, but of all ages. They're clean and free of expletives, which is great because it's family friendly. They're conceptual, so they're making you think a little bit, and they're also, as we've discussed, they force you to think about the meanings of words.
Right.
So for older people that are facing mental decline and who want to maintain their mental agility and their mental clarity, this material is helpful because it's forcing them to make new associations with words and to think about language, and they're loving it. From what she says, they get big laughs out of it.
Good.
And so I'm very excited that it can be positive.
Did you know that was going to happen?
No, absolutely not.
Had you considered that possibility when you were writing it?
To think about that for a second. I know that the material leads you through subject matters and content that forces you to put things together that you might not have put together before, including paradoxical things that don't really fit together, and that's the joke.
Right.
So I've thought of these as like little, it's like weightlifting for the brain a little bit. They're doing little mini calisthenics to exercise your brain. And sometimes they say you have to write the book that you want to read.
Right.
And
sure.
I find that a lot of humor in the world is very heavy-handed. You don't have to think. They're telling you what's funny, and they're hitting you hard with it, and you laugh. And I think that that's wonderful. I don't want to put that down. But humor is a very nuanced thing, and it can be used to draw people in and make them do a little bit of work. So they have to put the final pieces together to understand the joke. So I'm not telling you what's funny. You need to do a little bit of work, and then it's more gratifying. So when I perform this material live, often there's this pause, and you can think it's perfectly quiet, and I didn't get a laugh, and then it starts happening about a second later, and then sometimes it can go on for 10 or 15 seconds. Cool. So there's this wait for it, wait for it, sizzle.
Yeah.
And that is the best kind of humor because you're engaging the brain.
Yeah, that's cool. That's really cool. I do want to touch on some of those performance things because you've got some cool ideas on that. Having talked about the impact that it's having on those elderly folks, what's next in regards to this book? We had talked before the show about its impact on the elderly and some directions you might want to go with that. I don't want to give it away. I'll let you kind of talk about some of your ideas with that.
Sure. Well, I've been invited to present this material through live stream to this one senior center in Georgia.
Cool.
I'm excited to do that, and I can see how that kind of program can be duplicated in other senior centers. And I'm excited to work with that population. I'm developing a program that I could deliver to them in which I teach them some of the formulas that I like to use in my comedic writing, and then I want to help them write their own jokes. I want to coach them on performing them, and then I'd love to see them share their own original humor with others in their community and with their friends and family. And I'd like also for them to look back at their own lives through the lens of humor.
Right.
Because that can be very healing. Humor isn't just a laugh. A lot of times people are making jokes about things that have hurt them. To be able to joke about that stuff can heal some of the pain.
Yeah.
And sometimes making the joke itself gives you the distance that you need from those things to be able to walk around it in a new way and see it in a different light and let some of it go.
Right. Yeah. I know when we had talked before the show, you had mentioned the homes and getting them involved and the impact that it could have. That is so needed. And what a great way to do it, because it's light, it's fun, but it can still be challenging and, like you said, healing. And help them to make those connections so they can keep their brain active, which is, we're dealing with that a lot now as we are living longer. So having this is a great, great tool. So that was really exciting to hear that you were going into that.
Yeah, I'm excited about that. And I'm excited to work with other writers or regular people who want to sharpen their minds, take a step outside of their comfort zone, and do their own healing, because all humor is philosophy, and for people to find their comedic voice in their own lives is great for everybody.
Right.
And not only in the psychological healing sense, but also in business meetings with their family, with their partners, diffusing tension with a joke is always helpful.
Right. Yeah.
Always helpful.
Right. In your performance stuff, have you already performed in homes? And when you do that, do you tailor your humor to a age demographic or a country demographic for those folks to kind of draw them in more?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I do a variety of forms of performance art. So reading from the book and sharing that material is just one of the types of performance art that I do.
Right.
But I'm always tailoring for different audiences. So I do a show in planetariums, as we spoke about before. It's science comedy. The show is named after one of the chapters in my book.
Right.
Even the Earth is Bipolar, and it's all science comedy. And when I do the show in Portland, I tailor the show to a Portland audience, and I know that a lot of them were scientists who came to my show. So I got to keep the material at a fairly conceptual level, and got a great response from them, because everyone's looking to laugh and looking for material that will meet them where they're at. So the job of a performer is to understand who their audiences are and then learn how to package what you have to say in a way that's relatable for them. So for sure, if I'm in a biker bar somewhere, I'm gonna select different jokes and have a whole different approach. If I'm in a retirement home or a senior living center, I have a different angle that I would bring into it. I did the show also in Oakland, and I tailored it for that audience as well. And so surely you have to understand who you're talking to.
Right. Going into that a little bit more, when you're working with elderly now that you've seen the impact it can have and you're starting to think about the options that you've got in that audience, is that a challenge for you to write in a way that will help challenge them? Does it give you more work to do to be able to make it more applicable, or do you just kind of stay the course?
I think that there's a certain generational quality to my writing that it surprises me that some of my jokes could be appreciated by older people, because some of the language is it's like being rude to the person you're texting with. Some of these people are people who've never texted in their lives. So there's a certain social milieu that I think is broad, but it's contemporary. So anyway, I think that the material dips into different generations. I have jokes about Aristotle and Plato and philosophical ideas, and I have jokes that are very contemporary about life today. So I think there's a lot in there for everybody.
Cool. Very cool.
And I was once watching this young man, I think he was maybe 16 years old, and he was going through the book, and I'm kind of watching him, and he's loving it. I said, did you like it? He said, I read it from beginning to end in one sitting, so
That's
what
cool.
does that tell you?
Yeah,
and I said,
good.
there was a few, he said, I didn't get. And I go, oh, no, that's terrible. Which ones? And he said, no, it's not bad. He told me this.
Yeah.
He goes, I'm going to go back and figure them out. And I realized, that's fabulous.
Yes.
That creates stickiness,
Yeah.
right? I'm challenging him in some ways, and they're all like little word puzzles.
Right.
Like where's the joke? You have to. It's like where's Aldo? You're looking for where the funny is, and you're thinking about it, and you're thinking about it.
Yeah.
And so I realized if there's a few that are over somebody's head, or that didn't quite get what the joke was, that's not a bad thing.
No, and that's one of the things I thought was brilliant, and why I was wondering, do you, now that you've seen the impact that it has, do you start to write them intentionally more challenging to activate those things, or just let people grab what they can grab?
It's interesting, when we put the book together, basically we had something like 700 or 800 jokes, and you can almost think of them as just like in a pile on the floor. And then how do you pair them up? I spent months trying to figure out. There's 3 per page, as you know.
Yep.
And then there's some art and illustrations in the book as well. So I try to create a rhythm in the book where there's pretty easy, a little more conceptual. So I'm trying to give the reader an enjoyable ride where there's going to be a mixture of jokes about society, jokes about the self, some that are kind of easy to get, and then there's some that you have to think about a little bit. And so I try to create a mix where you can experience the full spectrum of effects that the jokes can have.
Yeah. Trick question, and that is, those are always fun, aren't they?
Yeah.
Are you going to do a continuation of this? Book 2 or whatever?
I would love to repackage some of the material that's in this book under a new title in the future, and maybe a smaller, condensed book. But I'm not writing these. I don't have much more to add to this. I spent
And that's
years,
what I was wondering, because you talk about a pile of things to choose from, and does that create, now I need to continue that because, of where it left off, or did you get to that point and go, I think that's good?
This is probably 700 or 800 out of about 3,000 jokes that I've written, and I've poured through the rejects.
Yeah.
And I've said, I've mined them. There's got to be some, and every now and then I go, oh, how could I not put that one in the book?
Yeah.
And it's interesting, time is an interesting factor
Oh,
too.
yeah.
Because I wanted to tell you that I asked 12 peers of mine to rate on a 1 through 10 scale 400 of my jokes along the way. And I did this a few years ago because, as you said, I write music, I write poetry, I write humor. I can tell you that for me, in my thinking and in my experience, I can write a poem that I can tell you people are going to like that. I just know it's going to lead them along. I don't write dense poetry. All of my poetry, it goes down like honey. It's easy. You're in the flow. Because I'm writing for my reader. I'm not writing for myself. I'm not saying, what do I really have to say? I'm saying, how can I meet my reader and bring them in so they have pleasure and they go, I enjoy this guy's work. It just goes into my brain easily. A lot of poets don't do that. And I write music, and I can also kind of say, when I go to that G chord and then back to the A, they're going to love it. These are formulas that work. Humor is harder because I can write a joke and I don't really know, I think this is funny, but nobody else will, or are other people going to like this joke too? It's hard to get distance from humor and decide, is there just a certain nuance to the way this is, the sentence construction, or a certain word that I have associations with that make it funny for me? So I had other people tell me what they think about my material. And then I used that feedback extensively. So I divided it up into 4 quartiles, and I can tell you what the number 1 joke was. I can tell you what the least favorite joke was. Yeah. And I can also tell you where there was the largest standard deviation, meaning where they were the most split. Like there were 12, like 1, 2, 1, 1, like terrible, and others like 9, 10, and like where they're completely split on it.
Yeah.
And
were you surprised by any of those?
Let me think. That was a while ago.
Something you're like, man, this has got to make it in the book, and then nobody liked it, and you're like, why? You know, why did that end up there?
Yeah. Yes. Well, I mean, I divided it up into 4 quartiles, and I took most of the top 25%. Like the ones that they liked the most, I kind of liked the most too. So there's a certain, some of it made sense to me, but I also used some of the least ranked jokes from that exercise because I think it's funny. It's my book.
Right. And someone else is bound to think it's funny as well.
Yes. Yeah. Or meaningful, or it just had its place. And some of that is, it's impossible to describe. It's ineffable, but you just know it has its place.
Yeah.
But I think that it's a sign of maturity to take feedback like that.
Oh, absolutely.
And listen to it because they are the experts on their experience. So I will listen to them. If you tell me I didn't like this material, I won't be offended. You're telling me what your experience was.
Sure.
And but that, I think with humor, it's really important to get a little distance like that. And so I say that because I think if I went through those 2,000 or more rejects from the first book, I can go through it 2 years later and go, why was this joke, this is so funny and so important.
Yeah.
But hopefully I've did a good job of mining from that.
Sure.
And so I don't really see a sequel to this, but I see more work coming out of me this year.
Sure.
Yeah.
The other thing we had talked about, we've talked several times, and it's always been loaded with information and lots of fun. But we'd like to have you back, talk more in depth about kind of where you came from when you were doing this book, some of the ideas that are in the book, but also to bring you in and talk about your planetarium shows, talk about your music, talk about your poetry. You've got a lot of cool stuff to share, and it's interesting to me looking at them, how they can all tie together. It's really, really cool, and so we want people to come on the journey with us, so definitely would love to have you back. Thanks for coming in today.
Thank you. I'm excited to come back and really dive into some of the philosophical nuances and some of the kind of subliminal messages of the book.
Yeah, that'll be fun. Awesome. Well, thanks again for coming up.
Oh, thank you.
Appreciate it. This was a blast.
Wonderful
to
do this, yeah.
Folks, stick around during the credits. We're going to have his contact information, his website, where you can find his books, where you can look for his poetry and start digging into his music and stuff so you're ready for it when he comes on again. And make sure you like, you share, you subscribe. If you have questions or comments, definitely share those with us as well. And look for more Gregg Eisenberg in the future. We're going to have him back. I'm Michael Hartstock. Thank you for watching Futurartist Records Presents.
Everything around me now just seems to be part of the circle circling the sea. Effortlessly, the morning sun